What do you think of this US general's assessment that the British Army is no longer a top-level fighting force? Do you think it's accurate?
I don't agree with them at all. You know, and you can find any American general to give you one opinion or another. The fact is that the British Armed Forces might have been weakened recently, but they're still a formidable fighting force, and I think our country can be proud of them.
The conversation that Deborah had said that the Defence Secretary had been told that the UK has been demoted from Tier 1 to Tier 2 in terms of an international fighting force. I mean, how does that work? Is that some kind of formal structure, or is this just something that's discussed behind closed doors? And if this is true, how damaging is that?
I think it's a subjective judgment by individual commanders, you know, and they vary, they come and go. And although I've got my criticisms of what the government is doing and how it's conducting its defence at the moment, I would not agree with that, and I don't think the majority of people in America would agree, and in the American military would agree with that particular sentiment. We still have a formidable force. We're the second military power in the West, and we're a nuclear weapon state. So I don't think any of our adversaries or enemies have come to the same conclusion as this particular American general has.
And yet, if you look at the details of where we are financially, the amount that is being spent on our forces, the concerns about procurement of new weapons, it would seem that perhaps the British Army is not as strong as perhaps the government might like it to be.
Well, it's not as strong as we would like it to be and as the Defence Secretary would like it to be, but it's got to live within the constraints of the expenditure that it gets. I believe that there should be more money spent on defence, and that we should be replenishing a lot of the stocks that we're giving at the present moment to the Ukrainians. I think it's very important that we don't just judge defence based on spending. In NATO, I was very clear that it was what we spent our money on rather than the quantity of the money. It's building capabilities, and we've got substantial capabilities, but they will erode and they will diminish if the present sort of cutbacks take place and continue to take place. If this country wants to be properly defended in a very increasingly dangerous world, then it's going to have to make sure that we have the right priorities in place. So the Army, the Navy and the Air Force are our front line in defending us against the threats that are out there in the world today, and they need to get the resources that are required.
Where would you say the right priorities would be then to spend these resources? We believe that this American general has said some £3 billion is needed to be pumped into the defence budget. Do you think that seems like the right kind of sum?
Well, 3% is what Prime Minister Liz Truss was promising during her very brief Prime Ministership. But it's probably quite right. And that shouldn't be gained simply by the fact that our GNP goes down. It means focusing on capabilities and on readiness and making sure that the defence of the country is based on a realistic assessment of what is actually needed. That's why the defence review that I did in 1998 was based on a foreign policy baseline, i.e., you work out what it is you want as a country to do, and then work out how best you're going to do it. And that's what should be doing just now, that Ben Wallace should be doing at the moment, and presenting the results of that to the Prime Minister. And I think right across the board there would need to be and must need to be a strengthening of our capabilities.
And that strengthening, we know that there are plans to shrink the army further in the future that are already set out. Do you think it is time now to halt that?
It's too easy to simply cut back on the numbers in the British Army because, of course, so much of the defence budget is already committed for the long term, and that's why manpower and woman power is being cut back as the easiest option. And I think we've got to the stage now of stopping pretending that reserves can make up the gap for the number of people that we've actually got. The actual physical boots on the ground that would be required for the future. I don't think we should be cutting back any more physically on the number of people in the armed forces. It's time to properly look at what the country needs and make sure that the resources are available at the highest level for them.
We have this refresh of defence policy, which is due on the 7th of March. Aside from not cutting back army forces any further, what else would you like to see in it?
Well, I would like to see some of the procurement projects brought up to date and constrained. Every year, the National Audit Office does a survey of the procurement projects, which are usually way beyond target, both in times and in terms of money. And I think the country deserves to make sure that the money that is spent on defence is properly spent and is spent wisely. And in some areas, I think the overspend means that they are not getting proper value for money, nor are the troops and the people who use them getting the equipment that they require at the right time. So that's where I think there needs to be a searchlight put on our procurement processes.
And in terms of procurement, there are some concerns that something of a black hole has been created by the level of our support for Ukraine in terms of the weapons that we now have in reserve. Does that concern you, or are you very comfortable that what we have done for Ukraine is the right thing to do, regardless of the impact?
I think we have to do much more for Ukraine, and we have to replenish the stocks that we're using there as well. But, the fact is that the enemy is at the gate. Our front line is no longer the White Cliffs of Dover. It's eastern Ukraine. They're fighting for us at the present moment. Putin has declared war on the West, and the front line of that war is in the Donbass and in eastern Ukraine. So there's little point in keeping our Challenger tanks back on Salisbury Plain when the front line is actually out there in eastern Ukraine. So I think we've got to send more of our equipment out there, and then the Prime Minister and the government as a whole have got to make sure that they replenish those elements of equipment that have been sent out.
A final thought. Do you think Rishi Sunak sees himself as a wartime Prime Minister?
I don't know whether he sees himself as a wartime Prime Minister, but he is. Yeah, he's in place at the present moment, and there is a threat to the safety and security of people who live in the West because of what Vladimir Putin is doing. So the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister at the present moment, and he's got to rise to the occasion. And national security is one of the principal responsibilities of anybody who occupies 10 Downing Street. And therefore, he's got to be serious about it, serious about the resources that he puts into it. And frankly, he's got to be a lot more serious about taking on the likes of Vladimir Putin at this time, because our safety is at risk.